Hello. Today I'm excited to welcome Catherine. Hello, Catherine. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'd love to introduce myself and thank you very much for having me here today. And my name is Catherine Cooper and I am a midwife. I've been a midwife for 15 years and I've had a very broad range of experience as a midwife. I started my career in the NHS. I was late to midwifery. I qualified when I was 40 years old because I needed a way to support myself and my children as I was getting divorced. And I chose midwifery because I'd thought about doing nursing for a long time, and but I decided that I really liked the idea of being an autonomous practitioner, which is for me was one of the key points of midwifery. I worked as a hospital midwife and a community midwife, and then worked in practice development. I was a supervisor of midwives when they existed. They became extinct in 2016. And then I worked as an education team lead for a while and also set up a birth centre in one of the London hospitals. And then I went to work as a consultant midwife for an amazing organisation called One-to-One Midwives, who provided this amazing gold standard caseloading care for women. They were a private organisation, but they provided NHS funded care. So the care was free to the women. And I worked for them for about a year. And then I decided that I no longer wanted to work for anybody full time, not the NHS or a private organisation. So I left full-time working and I now work as an independent midwife. I also trained as a KG hypnobirthing teacher, and around the same time I also undertook a course in the three-step rewind technique, which was kind of a complementary service for me in a way, because when I was doing my midwifery training during 2005, I also undertook an NLP practitioner's course, and the three-step rewind process is based on an NLP technique. And so I kind of had a grounding in it and understood the processes behind it and how it worked, and had actually had that technique, I won't say done to me, but had used that technique during my training as part of my training and experienced it myself, and how powerful a technique it is. So since about 2017, I've been working for myself. I do work as a hospital midwife still, but just as a bank midwife. And as I say, I offer independent midwifery consultations, and I also offer birth debriefing service, and I also offer the three-step rewind process for women who have experienced traumatic births. And I also offer birth planning sessions for women who, may feel that they need to talk to someone with sort of independent experience to help them formulate a birth plan that will help them through, be that trauma informed or just needing to talk to somebody who's not working, in the hospital that they're attending. So.
Thank you, Catherine. That is absolutely amazing. And what a wide range of services. So, so wonderful to offer. The birth debriefing and the three-step rewind, which of course I know what that is, but nobody else does. So let's start by finding out a little bit more about birth trauma, and then you can explain what the three-step rewind process is.
Thank you. Well, birth trauma actually, or perinatal trauma, encompasses quite a wide range of different things. So I think initially, sometimes when you talk about a traumatic birth, people automatically think that it has to be an emergency and horrible obstetric emergency things happening. And sometimes absolutely that is the case. And for women who haven't understood what's been happening, perhaps that's because they haven't been communicated with throughout the experience. It can be very frightening. And if we are subject to an experience or witness someone that we love in a situation where they believe that they're going to be harmed or they're going to die, then this very often causes this traumatic response in people. And when we are afraid in those sorts of situations, then our fight, flight or freeze response is triggered, and we are, we want to run away or fight. And clearly, if you're in hospital, which I have to say is where the majority of birth trauma seems to happen, and you're about to give birth, or you're undergoing treatments or various different procedures, then you don't have that opportunity to run away or to fight. And what can happen is then, after the experience, normally what happens is our brains will process these experiences and gradually will return to normal. But for some people, they kind of get stuck in this fight or flight response. And so they may be finding that certain things are triggers for them. It could be a particular kind of lighting. I've experienced women who find that lying on their back is very triggering for them because this happened while they were laying on their back, or seeing strip lighting. One woman I spoke to recently, she had to she couldn't sleep in the dark because for various reasons that had that was very triggering for her. So birth trauma comes in a variety of different guises. But for some women, there has been no major life-threatening emergency. It goes much deeper than that in a way, because it's about the way they were treated during the birth that they experienced. And so they felt out of control, or I think more importantly, they feel that they weren't heard or they weren't listened to. And this can be in a variety of different levels for different people, and lots of different situations. And this can happen in pregnancy. For some women, it happens during even during IVF, preconception time, and it can all be tied up with the pregnancy. But similarly, not just the birth, but also postnatally. And then there's a whole another raft of women who've experienced breastfeeding trauma, grief and trauma. And I think more often than not with those sorts of experiences, it's about the way that they perceived they were treated and that they weren't heard. And so many times, when I often haven't been able to always help women with the rewind process because it's not appropriate for everybody, the feedback I've gained is that people have found just being listened to and having their story heard and validated so valuable for them, and can help start them on that healing journey, because I think when you start your parenting journey from a point at which you feel that because you weren't heard, therefore you feel you have little or no value, or what you say is or believe is of little or no value, it starts to really chip away at your self-esteem and your self-worth. And it's very sad that women are experiencing this at the hands of a supposedly caring maternity service, but it's widespread and it's happening every day, and women are not being listened to. And you and I see this all the time, and it's women are having to really educate themselves and get support. And I think it's great that women are doing that, but it shouldn't be the case that the only way to be heard is to seek outside support. It should be the absolute basic level of care is to be having those conversations with care providers that make us feel valued as individuals, and not just as if we're being processed, or that no one cares about us.
Would you think it's right when a person is pregnant for the first time, they don't realize that birth trauma is something they might experience? They might think, oh, the birth might not go well, or it might not go to plan because that's what my friends have told me. But maybe they don't really grasp the fact that what they will come out the other side with is trauma. Because, you know, we've all heard the saying, a healthy baby is not all that matters. And I actually wrote an entire chapter on that subject in my book because I felt it was so important for people to understand in pregnancy, both the birthing person and the partner. But does it really sink in?
I don't think it does, no. And I think, you know, if I reflect on my own experiences as a mother, you know, part of the reason why I took this journey was because of my own experiences as a birthing mother. My first birth, it was traumatic, and it, you know, it affected how I felt about myself for a very long time. And you know, that my first birth was in 1993, and it was 2005 when I first did that NLP course, when I did that rewind process. But it was also during my training, my midwifery training, that I actually realized how much I was still affected by what had happened to me during that first birth. I've been very lucky in that I'd had much more of a relationship with my midwife for my second birth. So I felt my second birth was, you know, it was physically very empowering, but also mentally very empowering. It was, you know, it was the second time round was a physiological birth, whereas the first one had ended up with various interventions, and I had to be put out for under a GA, and you know, I had various things that happened during that. But I realized later that it was the way I'd been made to feel during that event and afterwards by certain people around me, that had probably had some of the biggest effect on me. The physical trauma was one thing, but the psychological trauma and the impact that had on me and my self-esteem was very great. And I think what you say about, you know, women experiencing their first birth, I think we had this kind of innate or more of a cultural belief that actually all healthcare providers are there to do the best for us. And I think, unfortunately, I think if you know, pretty much every individual healthcare professional that you speak to would absolutely say that they have everyone's best interest. But when they're working in a system that doesn't recognize individuality, or, you know, a person's individual needs, and sets time limits on birth and sets time limits on pregnancy, and wants to start a cascade of intervention at the slightest thing, and to pathologize birth, you know, sometimes it feels like you know, with the slightest thing, because they're all coming from a place of, or it feels as though coming from a place of defensiveness, and wanting to absolutely correctly wanting to do things like reduce the stillbirth rate, you know, but how much damage is being done as a result of this, and you know, how many babies' lives are actually being saved, as you know, for the level of intervention, how much harm is being done to women unnecessarily,
Yeah.
with these highly interventionist births. And you know, sadly, the majority of the women that come to me following traumatic birth experiences, they have been they have had those interventions, they have had all these things done to them, and very often they can see retrospectively that it wasn't necessary and it wasn't needed, and unfortunately that creates doubt in themselves, you know, because they say, if only I hadn't done this, and if only I hadn't done that. But they don't, you know, we all do the best we can at the time with the resources we have available to us. So, but it's easy for me to say, oh, don't beat yourself up, but because, you know, we all do from time to time, you know, and we do that what ifs, and you know, the ifs, buts and maybes, and if only I'd known this, and if only I'd known that. Well, you know, it's taken me 20 years to get to the stage where I know, you know, all the things that I know, and I don't know everything. You know, it's every day is a learning experience. Yeah, so it's just,
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why about 6 years ago I did change my course content on my antenatal courses and put more of an emphasis on the role of the birth partner, which led me to write the book, because for me, she shouldn't be in that room with all the responsibility on her shoulders. And because typically a birth partner doesn't do reading, doesn't do research, doesn't understand what kind of situations can lead from, you know, one intervention to the next,
yeah,
that's one of the reasons why I feel like, you know, it needs to be clearer. And one of my sayings, as you may have heard me say, is T-Brains isn't enough. You know, T-Brains is a great acronym for asking questions during the birth process, but typically by the time you get to ask these questions, you've already passed the point of no return.
yeah,
Not always, but sometimes you've lost your oxytocin, your baby is you know, possibly being evicted too soon, you're potentially, you know, going down this road that you know, it's really, really hard to step off of. So I do feel like if we could just get to a point in pregnancy where couples really recognize the power that they hold, that's when you can stop lots of the intervention. Yeah, it's pretty tough, isn't it, listening to some of these stories, and it doesn't seem to get any better as the years go by. I would love this podcast episode to be full of the joys of spring, where we turn around and say, but it's fine, because actually we've got some great news for you. Things have changed, but unfortunately that isn't the case, because with the rise of interventions like induction, for example, which are just getting, you know, incredibly more prevalent in hospitals, in my area specifically, I can tell you that the induction rate is sky high, and you know, sometimes our C-section rates are up nearer the 50% mark. So it's not great news, and it does take a very strong person to sit down in front of a midwife or doctor and say, thank you so much, but I choose to make a different decision than the one you're offering, you know, at this point in my pregnancy. So unfortunately, the circumstances do mean that we are ending up with more and more trauma. So let's talk about what you do to support families in the postnatal period if they do experience birth trauma.
so I often have women referred to me by other midwives, and sometimes that's very soon after the birth, because a colleague may be visiting a woman postnatally who is in obvious distress regarding the experience that she's had. And sometimes I talk to these women. I offer a free 30-minute consultation call, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about their experience to see if I can help them. And sometimes, as I say, just talking to someone and having someone listen to you and maybe answer some questions about why what happened. I mean, you know, obviously I wasn't there, but with my experience as a midwife, I can often you know, give reasons as to why certain things were done, or you know, provide clarity on certain procedures, and you know, etc. And so if, and when it's very early on as well, it's our brains are still processing what has happened, so that's not a time for doing something like a rewind, because you know, we find very often that if things are left alone, that our brains will process things and we'll move on naturally. But I often find that women who are either considering having another baby or have found themselves pregnant for the second time or third time, depending on when their birth trauma was, and they're really not coping with the thought of the, you know, upcoming birth, or they're struggling, you know, with the pregnancy and becoming increasingly anxious. So I have to ensure that the women that we undertake the rewind with, because I'm not a trained psychologist or psychiatrist or anything, I have to make sure that these women don't have any complex traumas in their past, because I wouldn't be trained to deal with that. So the rewind can be used for any type of trauma, but I focus on birth trauma because you know, I have knowledge of that area myself, and you know, being a midwife, it gives me that grounding and understanding of, you know, how things have gone on. And so we do an initial interview and to find out if they're suitable and if they think it's something that would help them. And then the 3 steps, the first step we take is finding out, you know, listening to them and hearing their story, and finding out how it's affecting them on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes it isn't always happening every day. Sometimes it's, you know, the child's birthday perhaps is a trigger for that. And this could be years down the line.
Yeah.
And they find themselves back in that birthing room, or, you know, subject to unkind comments from relatives and things, or you should be over that by now, you know, because they're being emotional on their child's birthday. And society seems to want to underplay how this impacts on women and how common it is. And I don't know if that's part of a sort of very primal need to keep the species going by not telling people the truth about, you know, what it can really be like, or whether it's this, you know, as you said earlier, whether we do as a society really truly believe that actually the only thing that matters is the baby, you know, a healthy baby. Because it seems to me that we can't, as women, we can't nurture and develop healthy children and babies if we're not feeling, you know, tip top and well ourselves. So we do this exploration session, and then the second session. So a big part of the exploration session is actually discovering how that woman would like to feel if she wasn't feeling those things she was feeling. So the majority of women I speak to feel anxious, they feel overwhelmed, they're frequently hypervigilant, so they're constantly on edge, you know, wondering what's going to happen. Other times they're just having flashbacks and just tearful all the time. So if somebody asks them about their birth, or when you're going to have another baby, they just feel completely triggered. And you know, so it's discovering, you know, what would be the good outcome for them, you know, solution, what would be their solution, how they would like to feel if they weren't feeling the way they're feeling at the moment. And you know, that's usually that people want to feel calm and confident, and these kinds of things. And then the next session we do is the rewind itself, and it's a video visual process. So it requires being in a deeply relaxed state, and then talking through the 3 steps. And that is so we start off in a double dissociated state, and then a dissociated state, and then into an associated state, going through the experience. One of the benefits of the process is, if somebody didn't actually want to talk about the experience at all, they wouldn't have to tell me any of the details of the experience. They would just need to know what they were, and they could articulate how they were feeling, or how this experience had made them feel, and how they wanted to feel if they weren't feeling that way. And they can process it themselves completely silently without having to disclose anything like that at all. And then our third session is just usually 10 days to a fortnight later, and we catch up and you know, take a measure of the improvements and how they're feeling now. And you know, often after the rewind session, well, even after the first session, as I say, when people have had their story heard, they feel a lot better. And then usually immediately after the rewind, often people feel quite a bit lighter. And then the changes, they happen more gradually over the next few weeks, really. So, and then if we need to, we can repeat the rewind if there's bits that are kind of left behind. And that's what we do.
That sounds amazing. How many of your clients are between pregnancies, and how many have become pregnant again and realized they're carrying trauma?
Um, I would say about 50-50 actually. Um, yes, about 50-50. I think there's quite a few women who feel that they can't even contemplate another pregnancy until they've, you know, thought about this. So, feedback I've had from clients is that, they can now actually think about having another pregnancy. So that's a win for them, because not everyone will go on to have another baby, but I think to have that choice taken away from you by, what should have been an amazing life-changing event is really sad. If you've got, because we, even from a very young age, we build pictures and dreams and hopes and expectations of what our family will look like. And if building our family, whether that's 2 babies, 3, 4, 5, 6 babies, if on the, our first experience of childbirth has made us feel like we can't possibly do that again, it's not just it isn't just another baby that we don't have. It's the whole dream, the whole vision of our future life experience into old age. Because if you imagined having one child, you might imagine having 1 or 2 grandchildren, but if you imagined having 5 children, you might have imagined having 25 grandchildren. And so it's very much tied up with our vision for ourselves in our future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you could possibly get yourself into a better place regarding your experience, there is that potential that you would then go on to
Yeah.
fulfill the things that you wanted to fulfill in life, if that was important to you. What about birth partners then? Do you have many birth partners? Because we know that they do suffer trauma, but they're not as keen to access support, in my experience anyway. I can't speak for yours, but in terms of the people I meet as a doula, when I go into an appointment with a subsequent baby that they've said, oh, this time we need a doula to support us through because it was so bad last time, that's when often I discover that there's trauma by the birth partner, and they have never acknowledged it, mentioned it, recognized it existed within them, but it's so blindingly obvious. What's your experience with birth partners?
Well, my experience with birth partners is only kind of secondhand. I've never actually worked with a birth partner yet. Many of the women that I speak to, they do speak about their husbands being affected and how often they find it very difficult to talk about what has happened. And I think, probably witnessing a woman having a subsequent healing birth is probably, very healing for that birth partner as well. And I think, that's probably the couples that come to you, they will have, sought new information and perhaps thought about how they can be of more help um, a second time around, and perhaps realised that they weren't as useful as they might have been to their partner in the first birth. And I think that can be quite startling for birth partners, is the sense of helplessness that they feel when witnessing these things being done to their birth partners when they're giving birth to their babies.
Mm. I often say the phrase that birth partners can literally make or break the birth experience, and I do recognize how harsh that is. And I say it in pregnancy of a first baby purely because I think to myself, this is going to slap you about the face and wake you up to the role that you play. And actually, there's not that much to do to be a really great birth partner. It's the being, not doing side
Yeah.
of the doula role, the midwifery role, where we just sort of sit on our hands in the corner, but at the same time recognizing the need to do that and let physiology take its course, and to pipe up with confident support when required, as long as that's the birth experience that the pregnant person is planning. Of course, if she doesn't want that, then obviously we do something else. But overall, I don't see many, mostly men, but many birth partners, they're not always capable of that if they don't recognize that that's all they have to do. But I do think in the postnatal period, if the birth hasn't gone well, that isn't a great phrase to say, because they can take it so personally. And actually, going back to what you said earlier about the way that the maternity services is at this present time, really, there's so much that goes on that is out of their control, that they can't really take that massive responsibility all on their shoulders. And if they have come out the other side traumatized, I would love to think that they would go and access somebody like you, even if they didn't know anyone else that's ever done that before, because I do think that moving forward, if they have worked on the trauma they experienced, that would be so much more beneficial.
Absolutely. And I think what you say about birth partners making or breaking a birth is so true. And I've seen it throughout during my work as a midwife. And one thing I always said to women when I was doing hypnobirthing courses was, really, really think about who you want with you at your birth. And the great thing about doing couples hypnobirthing courses is that you pretty much know that you've got somebody who is signed up to being a decent
Captive audience.
partner. Yes, and
Yeah.
if they're there and they're doing the work with training for their hypnobirthing and supporting their partner with that, and learning the things that you learn on a hypnobirthing course, which isn't just about hypnobirthing, it's learning about choices, and like you said, about T-brains and making decisions, and the importance of being able to make those decisions. I think what's been really difficult for women and birth partners through the last years particularly is the birth partners have been kept away from the antenatal classes and the clinics, so they haven't been there to support their partners with decision making. And when things are happening that and being kept away during the induction processes and only being allowed in at the last minute during labour. I think that's been very, very challenging indeed. And yeah, it's just not been easy.
I agree. And it brings about trauma in a whole nother format, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the bonding process is not as great because their pregnancy bonding didn't happen in the same way. I think it is a very fine balance, for a birth partner to figure out where they fit when their own partner is pregnant, because they just don't know. I find that with a lot of couples who aren't genetically involved in the conception, if it's not their egg or their sperm and they are the other parent, and then the baby is born, and they often realize, hang on, where am I in this baby? Where's my nose and my eyes and my hair? And if the pregnancy doesn't give them the opportunity to really form firm attachments as much as can be formed in pregnancy, and then they start off on that basis of where am I, a lot of that relationship is really diminished from the outset. So the pregnancy, the scans, the appointments, they're so very necessary for that relationship to build with the baby as much as possible. And without that, has been a very difficult year.
Yes, very difficult. And I think the other thing that I find is women, I think they're not selfish enough around their own needs around the birth time as well. They want to, I think sometimes it may be a sort of almost slightly misguidedness, whether because they want to be inclusive and include the partner, but they don't necessarily vocalize their own needs enough. So, you know, I think I often see women who actually, you know, giving birth in a hospital, and they're worried about whether their partner's okay. You know, has he had any rest, and has he had anything to eat? And I'm like, stop worrying about him. You know, you need to focus on yourself. You know, and it's, you know, it's great to be inclusive and caring, but actually I think what women need in a birthing situation is somebody who is fully there and fully present and fully caring for them, and caring for them alone, as well as being able to care for themselves at the same time, you know.
Absolutely. I fully agree. And I hope if anyone is listening to this podcast and they think that that's what their birth partner or their own behavior with their birth partner would be like, I would really hope that they would invest in external support, or
Yes.
bring in another family member or somebody who's going to be experience not just their mum, because their mum is the next best thing, but actually if their mum's had a difficult birth experience, they're going to bring that with them. So maybe they're not the best person, but, you know, really accessing support from an experienced person who truly understands what's going on in the NHS right now, what is happening in maternity units, and so they can advocate if necessary in the right way that that person may need on the day. But who knows, you know, how things pan out. So I always use the expression that a good birth is not about luck. And I think hypnobirthing really is one of those tools that is about when a couple say to me, oh, well, we just got really lucky, we had a really quick and easy birth. And I'm like, no. It's not that you got lucky. It's that you did a lot of work and preparation in advance. And on the day, you let go of all of the things you knew, and you got on and you went with the flow. And when you can do that, that's when birth becomes quicker and easier in most cases. Of course, not all, but, you know, it often is about preparation, about knowledge, and about confidence in the body and the body's ability to give birth. And once you've got that, that's when you see the magic happen.
Absolutely.
So, what should somebody do if they recognize that they have suffered birth trauma? What would you recommend the first step is?
I think it's different for every person, if I'm honest, because everyone's experience is very different. So what's going to suit one person is not going to, you know, it's not going to be the cure-all for everybody. So I'm not going to recommend that everyone seeks out a 3-step rewind practitioner. But I think, you know, for a lot of people, writing out their experience and actually exploring and investigating their feelings around the experience is a really helpful and useful process. And I think talking about birth partners, if they can do that alongside their birth partner, because their birth partner's experience will have been different to theirs. And sometimes where there are missing pieces to an experience, then sitting and doing it together can be very useful, because, you know, one person's recollection of a certain part of the experience is going to be different to the birthing person's recollection of that experience. And another thing I often recommend people to do is to request a copy of their notes. And this can be done for free of charge under a subject access request. And usually if you go to the maternity pages of your hospital website, or the PALS section of your hospital website, that's the Patient Advice and Liaison Service, you will find out there the steps you need to take to make a subject access request. And there are, it's it's a legally binding obligation on the trusts to provide those notes to you within a certain time frame. I think there may have been some loosening of that time frame with COVID, because there was obviously, they weren't able to have so many people physically in offices sorting out notes and things. But the time frame, I think it was 21 days or 20 days, I think, from the time you make the request, which has to be done in writing, but that can be done by email or by post or by filling out the online form, which a lot of trusts have. And so exploration of the, again, for a different perspective of the same experience can help. And there'll be timings on there and situations like that. And of course, some people choose to go on to make legal claims for their experience because it's been that troubling for them, and obtaining the notes is a good starting point for something like that. But if you're seeking a debrief with an independent midwife, like myself, there's lots of other independent midwives and other people who offer birth debriefs. It's often useful to have a copy of the notes as well for that person to go through and be able to answer your questions about your birth. And so there's lots of other techniques you can use to help you process things, as journaling and things like that. Some people might want to approach the local IAP service or their GP to things like Therapy for You and their what are they called? Things like time in mind, or I can't remember what the different areas are called, but the local mental health services. But I think sometimes having someone who is specifically trained in birth trauma and relative the various different treatments is very useful. And if you're experiencing, if your symptoms are experienced almost entirely as a result of your birth experience, and that, then a treatment like a rewind, 3-step rewind, can be a very powerful tool to getting you back on track to being able to sort of carry on with your life in the absence of all these horrible symptoms that you're experiencing.
Yeah. Well, my last question is the same for everybody, and that is, what top tips can you give to any birth partner who is listening about supporting labour and birth?
I would say talk to someone who's been a birth partner recently, ideally in the hospital. If you're going to hospital, ideally in the hospital where you're going to be, or someone who's been a birth partner at a home birth if you're planning a home birth, and find out what they wish they'd known about that, but also think about what your needs are going to be and pack your own bag, even if it's a backpack, so that you've got an iPad, you've got a copy of the birth plan, you've got a book to read quietly in the corner, you've got snacks that you need, you've got money and cards and mobile phone chargers, so that your partner doesn't have to worry about you while she's giving birth, while they're giving birth. But also as an extension of that, have that conversation with your partner about what they're going to need from you during that time. So even if you haven't been able to attend classes together or do hypnobirthing together, these are often conversations that we don't have about expectations. And I think, as much as you say a birth partner, you said about a birth partner can make or break a birth, I think sometimes if you don't get the groundwork right for this life-changing experience that you're both going to go through, it can impact the rest of your relationship, and that can be very positive, very neutral, or in some circumstances, unfortunately, very negative.
Yeah. That's great. That's great advice. Thank you. Where can people find you, Catherine?
I'm on Facebook, Catherine Cooper, and I do have a Facebook page as well, which is Trust Birth. And I'm on Instagram, which is at Catherine_trustbirth. And my website is www.trustbirth.co.uk. And you can book a call with me in any of those places. I think my link tree is on my bio on Instagram. I've got book a call buttons on my homepage on my website, and you can find out all about my services, and there's quite a lot more about me, and you can sign up to receive emails if you want to. I don't email out very often, so you won't be bombarded with loads of spam in your box, but occasional updates and offers from me if there's anything you'd like to hear from me.
That sounds amazing. Very, very valuable and easy to remember. Yeah, well done. Thank you. It's been amazing talking to you. I've absolutely loved it. I've learned so much that, is so beneficial for everyone, pregnant, not pregnant. It doesn't really matter at what stage of your journey you're at. This is vital information to hear. So, thank you. Thank you for coming on and sharing all about what you do, because I really hope that people access the services and come and find you, because you're amazing.
Thank you for having me. It's been
Oh, it's been wonderful. Thank you.
much appreciated.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.